I was called useless and kicked out at my own sister's party. Hours later, I froze the family accounts and sold my $18 million stake. I stayed near the edge of the ballroom, trying to keep out of sight while Hannah soaked up every ounce of attention. The chandeliers sparkled, the floor shined like glass, and the room buzzed with people dressed to impress. Waiters carried trays of food, and laughter filled the air. Hannah lived for nights like this, and everyone made sure she was the star. But her eyes found me. They always did. With a sly smile, she raised her voice so the whole room could hear. "Well, look who finally made it. I didn't think you'd bother." Heads turned toward me. A few guests laughed softly, waiting for more. I tried to smile, tried to stay quiet, but Hannah wasn't done. "You know," she said, her tone sharp, "my sister doesn't actually do anything. No career, no accomplishments, nothing worth talking about. She's basically useless." The laughter this time was louder. I saw my mother chuckle like it was a well-rehearsed joke. My father shook his head and added, "She's harmless." The words hit harder than I expected. Harmless. Like I was a stray dog they kept around out of pity. I kept my lips pressed together, fighting the heat rising in my face. I wanted to disappear, but Hannah stepped closer, her eyes shining with satisfaction. "Why don't you just head home, Nat? Honestly, no one here would notice if you were gone." That was it. Not a tease, not a joke, a dismissal. She had shoved me out in front of everyone, and the crowd rewarded her cruelty with awkward laughs and whispers. I didn't say a word. I turned, set my shoulders straight, and walked out. My steps echoed on the polished floor, and the noise of the party dulled as the doors closed behind me. Outside, the night air hit my skin and cooled the burning in my chest. I breathed deep, steady, even though inside I was still shaking. Her words replayed in my mind, useless, harmless, dead weight. My own family had stripped me down in front of strangers like I was nothing more than a joke. But they were wrong. I wasn't useless. I wasn't harmless. They had no idea who they were laughing at. My grandfather knew me better than they ever tried to. He trusted me when no one else did. Before he passed, he made sure I held something powerful, my share in the family company. They all bragged about that empire, acted like it was their personal crown. But they never bothered to notice the documents with my name on them. They thought I had nothing. They thought they could push me aside. But as I walked into the quiet night, I knew something they didn't. By morning, their world would look very different. Hannah has always been the star in my family. She was the child my parents bragged about to anyone who would listen. If she got a promotion, they threw a dinner. If she bought a new dress, they gushed over how stunning she looked. Everything about her was celebrated. She was bold, spoiled, and she knew it. My parents, Richard and Elaine, were no different. They built their whole lives around image and money. My father spent most of his time tied to the family business, while my mother floated through charity events, book clubs, and lunches with people who cared only about status. Together, they made sure everyone in Charleston knew the Carver name meant wealth. And in every conversation, Hannah was their shining example. Then there was me, the quiet one, the disappointment. At least, that's how they made me feel. I was never the one they talked about. When family friends asked about me, my mother would force a smile and say, "Oh, Natalie's doing fine," before quickly steering the talk back to Hannah's successes. I learned early that my best effort would never be enough. Over the years, I was cut out of everything that mattered. When the family discussed business, I wasn't invited. When they made plans for vacations, I often found out last, sometimes only after they'd already left. Hannah treated me less like a sister and more like the help. I remember one Christmas, she tossed her coat at me as she walked through the door and said, "Be useful for once." My parents laughed, as if it was harmless teasing. To me, it was another reminder that in their eyes, I wasn't really part of them. The betrayal ran deeper than words. My father once made a deal that affected something my grandfather left me, but he never told me about. I only found out later when the papers had already been signed. When I asked him why he didn't include me, he waved me off and said, "It was complicated. You wouldn't understand." He didn't even try to explain. He just saw me as someone who didn't matter. I stayed silent for years. Not because I agreed with them, but because I refused to sink to their level. Dignity was all I had, and I held on to it tightly. I didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't try to prove myself. I thought silence was strength, that staying calm would protect me from the sting of their words. But inside, every jab and every dismissal carved itself into me. Still, I told myself to endure it. Family was family, even when it was cruel. I thought that keeping peace was better than starting battles I couldn't win. That night at Hannah's party, though, everything changed. They crossed a line they could never step back from. For the first time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. My silence had always been my shield, but now it would become my weapon. My grandfather was the only one in my family who ever truly saw me. While everyone else brushed me off, he listened. He noticed when I stayed quiet, and instead of teasing me for it, He said it showed I was thoughtful. He told me more than once that being underestimated could be a gift, because it meant people revealed who they really were around you. I never forgot that. He had built the foundation of our family's wealth. The company that carried our name, the logistics business that kept everything running, had started with him. My father may have expanded it, and Hannah may have used it for her social climbing, but it was my grandfather who put in the work when there was nothing but dust and empty ledgers. Maybe that's why he never trusted the rest of them to protect it the way he wanted. When he passed, he left me something that shocked me even then, 30% of the company. It was written in his will, signed and sealed. He left no speeches about why, no flowery letters, just a clear statement that those shares were mine. The lawyer explained it to me in private. He said my grandfather wanted to keep it quiet, and I understood immediately. If my parents or Hannah knew, they would have done everything to twist it in their favor. So I never said a word. I never bragged, never flaunted it. At board meetings, I sat in the back, quietly reviewing papers while my father spoke as though his word was final. Hannah would sometimes tag along, sitting there like it was a fashion show, throwing in comments that made her sound informed when she wasn't. Neither of them ever asked me a single question. They thought I was just there to fill a chair, and I let them believe that. Every document I signed, every note I took, I kept carefully. I organized my files, double-checked everything the lawyer sent, and stored it away. I knew one day it would matter. Maybe not soon, maybe not in the way I expected, but my grandfather hadn't given me that trust for nothing. There were times I almost told them. When my father dismissed me in front of a client, when Hannah made jokes about how I couldn't contribute a dime to the family business, when my mother told me I should be grateful, they kept me around. I bit my tongue each time. I told myself it wasn't the right moment. The longer I stayed silent, the more invisible I became to them. But invisibility was power. They never prepared for me, never guarded against me. They thought I had no voice, no rights, no share in anything they built their lives around. And all the while, the papers sat in my desk, locked away, carrying 30% of the company they treated like their crown jewel. I didn't know then how quickly I would need it, but I knew my grandfather believed in me. That belief was all I needed to wait. Back to the party humiliation. Guests whisper. I can feel the sound like a tide pulling at me, quiet at first, then louder as eyes turn my way. Hannah steps forward and her voice slices through the chatter. She mocks the fact that I do not have a real job, and people laugh like they are watching a show. My parents smile the way they always do when someone else gets applause. Their faces are warm for her and cold for me. A man near the bar leans in and lowers his voice, but it is meant to be heard. He jokes about how I should be grateful to be tolerated. Someone else snorts. The room shrinks around me until I only notice the space Hannah fills and the empty space I leave behind. Her words are small arrows, meant to wound right in front of everyone. No one stops her. No one looks at me with anything but amusement. Then Blake speaks. He is the kind of man who thinks power is measured by how much he can make others smaller. He smirks and says I will always be a burden. The word lands like a slap. The guests laugh louder, pleased to be part of the cruelty. Hannah's hand finds his, and she glows with pride, like he has performed the perfect trick. Their circle tightens, and I am pushed farther out. I feel something inside me change. It is not the old ache, the one that came with all the years of small cuts and jokes. This time the feeling is flat and clear like ice. My hands stop trembling. I do not beg for anyone to see me. I do not try to explain myself. I have learned that explanations are windows that close in your face. I stand up. My walk is slow, measured. My shoes click on the floor, and the sound is steady enough to drown the whispers for a moment. No one reaches for me. No one calls my name. The room continues to watch, hungry for more amusement. I leave without looking back. Outside, the night is cleaner, harsher, and it clears my head. The party noise becomes a distant hum. I breathe in and feel cool air fill the space where the shame was. I do not cry. I do not call my parents or beg forgiveness. For years I held my silence like armor, thinking it would protect me. Tonight that silence feels different. It has kept me invisible, yes, but it has also kept me safe. Safe does not mean powerless. I remember my grandfather's careful hands, the papers he left me, the quiet promise he made that someone would watch over me. I have kept that promise to myself. Walking away, I make a decision. I will not let their words define what I do next. I will use what I have been given in secret, and I will do it my way. It is not about revenge that breaks people. It is about reclaiming what I was always owed. Tonight they made me small. Tomorrow they will see I was never without weight. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the wheel, my mind sharp and clear in a way it hadn't been for years. When I walked inside, I went straight to my desk and pulled out my grandfather's trust document. I laid them out carefully, page by page, reading his handwriting, the seals, the signatures. He had trusted me with something none of them knew how to value. I had kept every paper safe, waiting for the moment I would need them. That moment had come. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Dalton. He had been my family's lawyer for decades, but unlike the others, he had always treated me like I mattered. Even when I was young, he explained things to me that everyone else ignored. When he answered, his voice was steady, like he had been expecting my call. "Miss Carver," he said. I wondered how long it would take. I told him what happened at the party, though I didn't need to explain much. He already knew how they treated me. He had seen it all, year after year. I said I was ready to act. He reminded me of what I held. 30% of the company. Full voting rights. Full authority to freeze the company accounts if I had reason to believe money was being misused. And I did have reason. My father and Hannah had been draining the business for their own spending for years, using it like a personal wallet. My grandfather had given me the power to stop them, and Mr. Dalton made it clear. I could act immediately. My heart beat hard as I listened. The power I had always kept quiet about, tucked away in folders, was real. I looked down at my grandfather's signature and thought about what he told me once. That silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. And patience, when the time came, was stronger than any argument. I took a deep breath and said, "Do it. Start tonight." There was a pause, then Mr. Dalton replied, "Very well. By morning, the accounts will be frozen. They won't be able to move a single cent without your approval." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle over me. For so long, I had lived like a shadow in my own family, but not anymore. I felt no guilt, no hesitation. They had called me useless. They had shoved me aside. Now they were about to learn what it meant to underestimate me. When I hung up, the house around me was still and quiet. I gathered the papers, straightened them, and slid them back into their drawer. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't ache. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt strong. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. Next morning, my father tried to pay vendors for the company, but the funds were frozen. He was used to things moving smoothly, every payment approved right away, every vendor treated like business royalty. That morning, though, nothing went through. He tried again and again, growing louder each time, slamming the keyboard like force would change the result. Calls from vendors started flooding his office, demanding to know why payments weren't arriving. For once, he had no answer. Around the same time, Hannah was out shopping with her friends. She handed the corporate card to the cashier with her usual smug smile, already turning away as if approval was guaranteed. Instead, the machine flashed red. Declined. She laughed at first, embarrassed but still trying to save face, and told the cashier to run it again. Declined again. Her friends exchanged looks, the kind of looks that burn more than words, and Hannah's smile slipped. She called the bank on the spot, voice sharp and demanding, only to be told the card was fine. The account itself was the problem. By midday, their panic had reached a boiling point. My father was yelling in his office, demanding answers from his assistants, his face growing redder with every passing hour. My mother sat stiffly in the dining room, chewing her nails, her calm mask cracking in front of everyone. Hannah stormed into the house, furious, her voice echoing through the halls as she shouted about being humiliated in front of her friend. They argued, each blaming the other, none of them willing to admit the truth forming in their mind. The phone calls spread next. Board members, accountants, bank representatives, all telling them the same thing. The accounts were frozen, and the authority to do that rested in one place only. My father went pale when he heard it. My mother whispered my name like it was poison. Hannah shouted that it wasn't possible, that I didn't have the nerve. My phone lit up over and over again. First it was my father, then Hannah, then numbers I didn't recognize but knew belonged to board members. The buzzing never stopped. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen as call after call stacked up. I didn't pick up a single one. For years, I had answered every time they called, ready to do what they wanted, ready to be treated like an afterthought. This time, I let the silence answer for me. The longer I ignored them, the calmer I felt. Their world was starting to crack, and I wasn't running to patch it back together. I wasn't their shield anymore. The house around me was quiet, my hands steady, my breath even. For the first time in my life, I was in control. They thought I was useless. Now they were learning I was the one who held the strings. I secretly met with Evan Mercer, the CEO of a rival company who had been waiting for a chance like this. We chose a quiet restaurant on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one would look twice at us. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. He already understood why I was there, and I could see the interest in his eyes. He wanted my steak, and I was ready to give it to him, on my terms. We sat across from each other, the table between us covered with neat folders and documents. Evan wasted no time. "I've been interested in Carver shares for years," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "But your family has never been willing to talk. You, however, you're different." I didn't flinch. I had stayed quiet too long, but now silence was my weapon. I told him I was ready to sell my 30% stake, but only if the deal was clean, fast, and worth what it was truly valued at. He studied me for a long moment, maybe expecting me to hesitate, maybe expecting me to fumble. I didn't. He leaned back, then nodded. 18 million. Cash and stock options. Finalized within a week. The number hit me not with shock, but with power. 18 million. The same stake my family had always dismissed as nothing, the same shares they had pretended I couldn't possibly understand, were worth more than all their insults combined. I looked him in the eye and agreed. My voice was steady. Make it happen. We shook hands. It was done. Over the next few days, the papers moved quickly. Evan's team worked quietly, carefully, making sure no one in my family caught wind of it until the ink was dry. I signed my name on the final page, and just like that, the shares that my father and Hannah believed they controlled were no longer theirs to touch. When the transfer was complete, I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It felt different than freezing the accounts. That had been power in the moment. This was permanent. The control was mine. I had chosen when and how to act, and no one could undo it. I didn't rush to tell them. I didn't need to. The silence was sweeter. They would find out soon enough, and when they did, it would cut deeper than any words I could ever say. I wasn't the useless sister anymore. I was the woman who had taken 30% of their empire and walked away with $18 million. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for their approval or permission. I didn't feel like the shadow in the room. I felt sharp, steady, and in control. The family stormed into my apartment without warning. The door slammed against the wall, and before I could even stand, Hannah was in my face, her eyes burning. "You're a traitor," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to rattle the glass on the table. My father followed, his steps heavy, his jaw set tight, his eyes full of fury. My mother came last, wringing her hands, her voice already trembling before she spoke. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" my father barked. He pointed at me as though I were a stranger. "You've destroyed this family. You've humiliated us. Do you know the damage this will cause?" Hannah cut him off, leaning closer to me, her face twisted with rage. "You ruined everything for your own family. For money. You think selling to Mercer makes you powerful? You're nothing but selfish." My mother's voice cracked as she stepped forward. "Natalie, please. Undo this. Tell us it isn't true. Tell us we can fix it." She reached for me like I was a child again, like she could beg me back into silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even stand. I sat there calm, steady, while they circled me like wolves. I let them throw their anger, their shame, their blame. And when their words finally slowed, I spoke. "I only ever played the part you gave me," I said softly. "You called me useless. You laughed at me, ignored me, pushed me out. So I became what you wanted to see. Quiet, invisible, harmless." I looked at Hannah, then my father, then my mother. But that didn't mean I was powerless. My father's face went pale. Hannah froze, her mouth half open, but no sound came out. My mother dropped her hands, her lips trembling. "I didn't destroy this family," I continued. "You did, when you decided I wasn't worth respect. I didn't humiliate you. You humiliated me, and you did it in front of everyone. And now you're shocked that I refused to stay in the corner you built for me." I leaned forward just slightly, my voice still calm. "Yes, I sold my shares. 30% of the company gone. And I walked away with $18 million. The room went silent. My father's fists clenched. Hannah let out a sharp gasp, almost a cry. My mother shook her head, as though denying the words would change them. "You called me useless," I said, each word steady as stone. Then I looked at each of them, letting the weight of it sink in. "Now let's see how useful your empire is without me." None of them spoke. They just stared at me, faces tight with rage and fear, as though the ground had shifted beneath their feet. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in their shadow. I felt taller than all of them. The company began to crumble as soon as the news spread that I had sold my shares. Evan Mercer wasted no time tightening his grip. He used his new stake to pull strings at board meetings, cutting into the control my father once boasted about. Deals started slipping through their fingers. Vendors who had once lined up to work with Carver Logistics now looked toward Mercer, eager to do business with someone who had the upper hand. The confidence that had always surrounded my family started to crack. Hannah felt the blow hardest at first. Her wedding plans, once the talk of Charleston, began to fall apart. Blake had always enjoyed the shine of our family name, the luxury, the promise of stability. But when he saw the chaos in the company, when he realized the wealth wasn't untouchable, he started pulling away. First it was small things, missed calls, excuses, delays. Then one night, he sat her down and told her he couldn't marry into a family falling apart. Hannah begged, shouted, even tried to guilt him, but Blake walked away, leaving her alone with her rage. My parents weren't spared either. Richard and Elaine had built their lives around reputation. Charleston society had always admired them, the parties, the appearances, the wealth that seemed endless. But now whispers followed them everywhere. People asked quiet questions about the frozen accounts, about the lost shares, about the rival who was now gaining ground. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends who once clung to them began keeping their distance. My mother, who thrived on polished smiles and perfect dinners, now avoided public events. My father, who once commanded every room, sat silent in the back of his office, watching his empire slip. While they scrambled to hold on, I quietly made my own move. I didn't stay in Charleston. I packed what I wanted and relocated to a new city where no one looked at me as the Carver disappointment. With $18 million, I had choices I'd never had before. I invested carefully, not in lavish parties or shallow appearances, but in a business venture of my own. I studied the numbers, trusted my instincts, and began building something that was truly mine. Every step felt steady. Every decision was mine alone. I no longer lived in the shadow of my sister's tantrums or my father's arrogance. I didn't hear their laughter echoing in my ears. I didn't wait for their approval. The money wasn't just wealth, it was freedom. Freedom to create, to live, to breathe without being told who I was supposed to be. Back in Charleston, their world was crumbling, but mine was just beginning to rise. I settled into my new life by the ocean, far away from the noise of Charleston. My beach house in Wilmington was small but perfect, with wide windows that opened to the sound of the wave. Each morning I walked along the sand, the salt air in my lungs, the sun rising over water that seemed endless. For the first time, I felt like every breath belonged to me and not to the weight of someone else's expectations. My work looked nothing like the life I had left behind. I built my own business slowly, carefully, with people who valued respect over status. Every partner I chose treated me as an equal, not as someone to be pushed aside. Meetings ended with firm handshakes instead of mocking laughs. Ideas were heard, not dismissed. And with each step, the company I was creating began to grow in strength and in trust. I no longer sat in the corner, invisible. I was at the center, where I had always belonged but had never been allowed to stand. Sometimes I thought about Charleston, about the house filled with arguments and sharp words. I thought about Hannah's cold smirk, my father's dismissive tone, my mother's quiet complicity. But those thoughts never brought regret. If anything, they reminded me of why I was better off here. I hadn't lost my family. They had lost me. They had chosen to see me as useless, blind to what I truly carried. They gave me away through their cruelty, and I had no reason to return. The evenings in Wilmington were my favorite. I would sit on the porch with a book or simply watch the tide roll in, the air cooler, the light fading to gold. No shouting, no laughter at my expense, no tension curling around my shoulders. Just peace. And beneath that peace was something stronger than I had ever felt in Charleston: pride. I had taken what they meant for humiliation and turned it into freedom. I didn't waste time plotting their downfall anymore. That work was already done, and the cracks in their empire were proof enough. What mattered now was the life I was building brick by brick, steady and solid, with no one to belittle or break it apart. As I looked out over the water one evening, my final thought settled in with the sound of the wave. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying others. It's building yourself up so high, they can't reach you anymore. And in that quiet moment, I knew I had won.